This is Kathy from Gadget Stop 321, and in today's video I'm going to be taking a look at Rohrer Klingner Cassia. Now I'm going to be testing it in a variety of pins and nib sizes ranging from a Pilot Extra Fine to a 1.5 stub nib, and I'm going to be featuring my Sailor LeCool, and this has a stainless steel medium fine nib. Alright, and I'll be using it in between the Pilot Fine and Pilot Medium. We can see how those compare. Now, I'm going to start with the Pilot Extra Fine. And this is a nice, really saturated purple. This is nice. Now, I've been saying this a lot lately, that my Extra Fine is performing really well with, several of my previous inks, but that's the case here. This dark purple is pretty wet for an Extra Fine, and I'm going to go ahead and put smooth. Now, this is relative. Smooth to other inks in this Extra Fine, not smooth compared to a broad nib, but I'm going to put a little heart beside this too. I did this on some of the other writing samples to remind me this is usable. This is a usable combo. Alright, next I've got a Pilot Pereira with a fine nib. Usually there's a pretty big jump in smoothness between the Extra Fine and fine nib. Not a huge jump in smoothness because this one was so smooth to begin with. Just a very pleasant. I like this this saturated purple in such a fine nib. It just looks good. Alright, now I've got the Sailor LeCool with the medium fine nib. I've had several people asking me to show this Sailor LeCool more, and this is one of those pens that it depends on what ink you put in it. I'm going to say, and I made a note of this on other writing samples, that this is nice. It's not super smooth like the Pilots, but the shape of the tipping on a Sailor nib is different than on a Pilot. Pilot nibs are really rounded, and Sailor nibs have kind of a flat spot almost. But this is nice. I've used this with other inks that, I wasn't really fond of this, but it wasn't the pen's fault. It just wasn't paired with a nice ink. The black ink cartridges that come with these pens, Sailor Black, Gentle Black, another nice one to write with. Alright, so that's a winning combination. Next I have another Pilot 78G, this time with a medium nib. This is supposed to be medium fine right here. Uh-oh. Huh. Well, I don't know why this one isn't writing. I'll just have to set that off to the side. I've been writing with it earlier. Let me make a note that that's a medium fine. Okay, well, let's go to the Pilot Pereira with a cursive medium nib. This is nice and smooth. This Pilot cursive medium doesn't put down a ton of ink like a lot of stub nibs do, but it spreads the ink out, so it's a little brighter purple than the first three writing samples. Next, I've got a Nimicine with a 0.6 stub. Now, this is a stub nib that is typically really wet. And this is a very flowy ink. This is glassy smooth, but there's just so much ink coming out of the nib here. It's just gliding across the paper. This is bordering on too wet for me. And this is a Jinhao X750 with a 1.5 stub. Okay, really wet there. Okay, I'm going to let that dry a little bit while we take a look at the other writing samples. Okay, now notice here, these were all really wet, but in this more absorbent paper in the ARC notebook, look at this. Hardly any of these smeared, not even the 1.5 stub. Look how much that smeared. All of that just soaked in the paper that fast. I wrote it and swiped it. So when you take a look at the other side, there's quite a bit of bleed through on the stub. Just a little bit of bleed through on the smaller stub, the Nimicine, and a little bit on the medium. Well, even on all of these, I can see the fine just a little bit. Is that the extra fine? Or hold on. Yeah. The finer nibs, you know, there's not as much ink to bleed through, so that might still be usable, these up here. But dries very fast because it soaks into the paper. And again, that extra fine, really pleasant to write with. I put a little heart beside that one. Oh, hold on, and I wanted to show, because this soaks into the paper so fast, these two just really, the ink spreads a lot. It's not looking like it's feathering so much, but the edges are a little ragged. As you're writing, that ink is just really spreading out. But it did really well on the Pilot Pereira. Okay, on Rhodia paper, let me see. I'm not seeing any sheen or anything. It's just a velvety, luxurious purple. All of these were really nice. The 78G was smooth. I put a little heart beside it. That's very usable on this paper. The Lacoule was nice, and I can't say that about all inks. Some inks are pretty unpleasant in the Lacoule, but this one was nice. The Nimicine was nice. I didn't write anything out beside it. It was just glassy smooth, to be honest. And it was so smooth that I didn't like it as much, if that makes any sense. All right. On 20-pound copy paper, notice these up here, how the ink will smear on the little ink smears. None of these smeared at all. They just soaked directly into the paper. So the finer nibs were the better way to go. The extra fine was very usable. The ink just spread too much on those wider nibs. And let's see. And even the extra fine, it wanted to bleed through a little bit. Everything bled through except the Pereira with the Cursive Medium nib. That was the only one that didn't bleed through. In my Leuchtturm, let me see if I'm seeing any sheen. I'm seeing absolutely no sheen, but this is again just a velvety, luxurious purple ink. I'm seeing a little bit of shading here, just very subtle, but it's just a really pretty purple. Oh, but I did want to show, let me see. It is such a flowy ink and so wet that it bled through the Leuchtturm. Now that's in a really wet 1.5 stub. I don't think you would have trouble with that. Just your everyday fine medium, maybe even a broad nib would not bleed through like this did. But definitely your fine and medium nibs would be okay. All right, and the Tomoe River paper. Let's see if there's any sheen on this one. Absolutely no sheen at all. So with these wider nibs, it was so wet that it was less pleasant to use. It was too wet. Now in the Pilot Pereira, it comes across much brighter. But my favorite are these extra fine and fine nibs. This is such a nice flowy ink. Those finer nibs tend to glide across the paper. I didn't have any snagging with the extra fine, and my Lacoule that I don't always like was really nice. It was a pleasure to use. All right. So if you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.